Hello and welcome to this week's episode of This Week. uh, my name is Rigved and I want to talk about the truth about Russia versus Ukraine. Now, why do I want to talk about this? Because it's the internet, everyone has their opinion, and I'm fascinated with all like the foreign policy stuff. I'm not that much interested in domestic politics of countries as much as foreign policies of different countries, especially in the age of nuclear weapons, where war is pretty much guaranteed to destroy everything. And so it's really interesting, I think, to see how countries interact with each other. And that is the foreign policy, that is the foreign politics. And the truth about Russia and Ukraine is there are multiple angles and multiple interests to this story. There's Russian angle, there's Ukrainian angle, there's NATO angle, there's US and EU angle, and there's opportunist China just waiting right there. So, so we should start with Russian angle and Ukrainian angle because the conflict is about Russia versus Ukraine. And to understand this Russian angle and Ukrainian angle, we need to understand the history of Russia and Ukraine. In Tsarist Russia, there were a series of wars called the Northern Wars, and Ukraine was central, or Ukraine was part of that territory of Northern Wars, and a lot of serfs, which is what Tsarist Russia was famous for. This is before Soviet Union. We are talking about Tsar, and the Tsarist Russia was famous for serfdom, while other countries were industrializing, and, and there were many serfs that wanted to be independent, and they lived in Ukraine, and there were many independence wars against Tsarist Russia in Ukraine by Ukrainian serfs. And after the fall of Tsar, Lenin happened, and then Stalin came in. Stalin is an important part of this because of the Ukrainian famine called Holodomor, where Stalin had quotas for collectivization of farming. Stalin had quotas for farming by collectivizing the farmlands. He took all the farmlands from peasants and he wanted to nationalize them. And Ukraine resisted harder than others. And Stalin wanted to punish Ukraine for their resistance. And so when Ukraine produced grain, Stalin exported them to industrialize the Soviet Union, and he took away all of their grain. And the subsequent famine is called Holodomor. Now Holodomor is really dark subject, and I'm going to talk about it in my future episode on Life and Evil of Joseph Stalin. But remember Holodomor. It was important part of this, and it still affects modern politics of Russia and Ukraine. And after World War II, I think around that time, Russians moved in a region of Ukraine called Crimea, and the native Tatar population, Tatar, were deported to Central Asia by Stalin, and which is another big part of this. And after decades after Stalin, Chernobyl happened in USSR in a government led by Moscow. Well, Ukraine gained its independence after the fall of USSR, and this is where things start to get ugly. and because Russia and the Moscow establishment basically wanted to rebuild the Soviet Union immediately after the fall of Soviet Union. Not sure if they want to be socialist or communist, or they want to be capitalist, but they definitely want to recapture all the territories lost by Soviet Union after the fall of Soviet Union. So in 2004 there was election in Ukraine. There were two candidates. One of them is Viktor Yanukovych and another one is Viktor Yushchenko. The Viktor Yanukovych was pro-Russian and Viktor Yushchenko was not. And Kremlin tried to rig this 2004 election and attempted an assassination of Viktor Yushchenko, and he then poisoned, well, Kremlin then poisoned Viktor Yushchenko. Wow, I'm really nervous, huh? So Kremlin poisoned Viktor Yushchenko, and Viktor Yanukovych, who was considered pro-Russian, won that election. And there were protests by Ukraine after this too obvious meddling in their elections by Moscow, called the Orange Revolution. And then there was a recount. Yanukovych actually lost after the recount, but in 2010 Yanukovych won fair and square because of lack of evidence of election rigging, basically, in 2010, and everything was fine for few years. And in 2013 anti-Yanukovych protests broke out after there was a cancellation of EU and Ukraine deal. And after these protests, Yanukovych was voted out of parliament. In 2014 there were protests in Crimea, a part of Ukraine filled with Russians because of Stalin. And Crimea is also strategically important from military perspective because it's a peninsula on Black Sea. So if you want to gain influence in the Black Sea, you need Crimea. And I think there was a referendum where people selected to go with Russia, and immediately Russia moved in and captured Crimea, and sanctions were put on Russia by the West. Okay, this is short version of Russia and Ukraine from historical standpoint. And so what is the Russian side? Well, it's obvious. The Moscow establishment wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. Putin wants to regain its popularity and not be seen as an authoritarian amongst Russian people. And one of the ways to do that and gain popularity is to start a war. And if Russia can become more influential on global stage, it's definitely good for Putin's ratings, right? And what is the Ukrainian side? Well, because of all this history with Tsarist Russia and Soviet Union, Ukraine does not want to be part of Russia. But Ukraine wants to trade with both the European Union and Russia. That's the Ukrainian side. The sanctions didn't affect Russia that much, and Russia is one of the biggest sellers of oil and natural gas to Europe. Now we come to European and NATO and United States perspective. Okay, so European Union is the biggest customer for oil and gas from Russia. And this is, you might hear about this in Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which connects Russia and Germany for natural gas. So let's talk about NATO. NATO made a non-expansion agreement to Gorbachev and USSR during German reunification process that was in 1991. And so basically they would not expand. They can take the Germany back, which was already a pain for Soviet economy. And after the fall of USSR, there was no real need for NATO. Let's be honest. Like, NATO was specifically for containing the influence of the USSR by the West. And USSR had a similar pact with other Eastern European countries after World War II. They were forced to participate, probably. Not probably, most likely. And the Soviet equivalent of NATO is called Warsaw Pact. And after the fall of USSR, there's no need for NATO because it was for containing USSR, and USSR is gone now. And European Union needs its own defense and military and all that, but there was no need for NATO. But you know the thing about bureaucracy, it only wants to perpetuate itself. It wants to continue itself. It doesn't necessarily act in the interests of people, but acts in interests of itself. And NATO decided to expand in mid-90s with Warsaw Pact states such as Poland, Hungary, and all the Baltic states. And Russia objected to these moves correctly because of non-expansion agreement set up with USSR. Now you might say USSR is gone now, but Russia basically took over all the international stuff, the international deals of USSR, which is why Russia is in UN Security Council after the fall of USSR. And Russia obviously objected to Warsaw Pact states and going into NATO and expansion of NATO correctly. And afterwards, NATO began talks about bringing in Ukraine and Georgia. This is Georgia in Caucasus Mountains, to the west of Russia, not the state in United States. Georgia are different. The one I'm talking about is in Eastern Europe. So Ukraine and Georgia, these are former Soviet states, and NATO wanted to expand and bring in these countries into NATO. And Russia began to increase its influence on these former Soviet states, correctly, out of fear. Whether it's right or wrong on Ukraine and Georgia, but imagine if the roles were reversed in Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet equivalent of NATO, reached the continent of America and started to include Mexico in it, starting with imagine if it included Cuba in the Warsaw Pact. If the Soviet Union included Cuba in Warsaw Pact, imagine it if the Soviet Union or Russia included Mexico in Warsaw Pact. How would United States feel, right? They would obviously be pissed off, and they would want to bomb Mexico. They would want to introduce freedom and democracy in Mexico. So what does the US want? Well, US has few friends in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Saudi wants to replace Russia as EU's oil seller, and they want to build a pipeline to European Union through Syria to replace Nord Stream. Qatar cannot provide natural gas to EU in long term like Russia. So all these things about Assad and all that. Remember, Saudi Arabia is building an oil pipeline through Syria, and Assad and all that. The politics gets really interesting. That's why, this is why I'm interested in foreign policy stuff, because it's basically a war, and not a nuclear war, not a world war, but it's interesting. It's kind of like watching chess pieces move, and that's why it makes it interesting. So Saudi Arabia wants to replace Russia and be and be seller of oil to Europe. They want European Union as their customer, and United States likes that because they don't want to they don't want Russia to increase its influence, because they won the Cold War. United States won the Cold War, and but the thing is, Qatar cannot provide natural gas to EU long term like Russia. Qatar is just not capable. For natural gas, EU needs Russia for natural gas, and excuse me. The United States wants to cut off Russia from EU forever, and I think the fear of Russia that caused Imperial Britain to invade Afghanistan in 1840s has passed down to United States from Britain, and we had to, just like just like UK was, or the Britain was the superpower before United States in the world during the colonial days, I guess you can say. They were afraid of Russia. UK or Britain stopped being like major global power after World War II, and United States replaced it. And Tsarist Russia was replaced by the Soviet Union. There was Cold War between United States and Soviet Union, and now United States is, for whatever reason, afraid of Russia and its influence on the world. But since there's no one who can provide natural gas to Europe, Russia has a massive leverage on Europe and NATO, and best, I think, opportunity to invade Ukraine would be in winter, where European Union needs all that natural gas from Russia. If EU or NATO objects, Russia can just cut off natural gas supply to European Union, basically mostly in Germany, which is kind of the king of European Union. And that's when Russia has best chance of invading Ukraine. So why do you think they would invade Ukraine in winter? Well, there was a build up recently near the Russia and Ukraine border, and Russia called it a military drill, practice drill basically. But during that practice drill, all the weapons that Russian military brought there in the near the Ukraine and Russia border, they left all the weapons there, just there, so they can just come back in and whenever they want and pick up the weapons, start invasion of Ukraine. And winter period is definitely going to be interesting, where Russia has massive leverage over the European Union with its natural gas. And meanwhile, China is just patiently watching this, right? Because let's say Russia invades Ukraine, right? NATO and all the European Union comes to the aid of Ukraine. United States tries to aid Ukraine against Russia. That's the best time for China to invade Taiwan. That will be the best time for China to invade Taiwan because United States is busy, or at least somewhat busy, helping Ukraine fight Russia. So that is why this thing is interesting. That is why foreign policy stuff and all the foreign politics, it excites me this much. Not because I'm Chinese or I want to see Taiwan invaded. No, no, that's not what I mean. Because it's like a game of chess that's being played, and every little move affects all the world, basically. So it's in China's best interest to start its invasion of Taiwan when Russia invades Ukraine, and it's in Russia's best interest to invade Ukraine when China is invading Taiwan. And because United States has to aid Ukraine as well as Taiwan, and it will split up military power of United States. And if China seizes this opportunity, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, and Australia has to come to rescue Taiwan, and United States has to come to rescue Taiwan. And if South Korea tries to interfere with China, North Korea will try to interfere with South Korea, because that's when South Korean military will be vulnerable. This is how World War III can start, potentially, or at least a major global conflict. You cannot call it World War III because we cannot be sure what will be the position of Australia, what will be the position of African countries, what will be the position of Latin American countries. So 3 continents, 4 Antarctica, but Antarctica nobody lives there except few scientists. So that's North America, Europe, and Asia will be in war if Russia invades Ukraine or if China invades Taiwan. So all the chess pieces are set. Well, I'm Indian. What about India? Well, India has a history of not invading countries for like 5 to 10,000 years, and Modi is definitely more aggressive in its military and foreign policy compared to previous governments. But this 5 to 10,000 year history, I don't know what India will do if China Taiwan conflict occurs. So what about United States? United States is world police, basically. But the public of United States, all of like 49 out of 50 states of United States, I think there are 50. Let me check. Oh, United States, not like us shows up like some movie, weird movie. Like, oh god. Yeah, 50 states. So 49 out of 50 states most likely do not want war. Which one want war? Which one state will want war? That's Washington. Yes, Washington and other states of United States are completely opposite when it comes to war. The rest of the country is against war, and Washington is more of like they want to introduce freedom and democracy like they have been doing in Latin America and Middle East. So the chess pieces are set. Russia and China want to invade for sure, and they will invade for sure, whether it's winter of this year, whether it's in few years before it's 2049 of Chinese Communist states like 100-year birthday. Russia and China will invade Ukraine and Taiwan respectively, and Russia most likely will go after other Soviet states as well. What about other? So these are the Russia and China pieces of this chess battle. What about others? Well, European Union and other Asian countries, specifically South China Sea countries, whether it's Japan, South Korea, Philippines, and Vietnam, they really do not want war, but they don't want Ukraine. They don't want to sacrifice Ukraine and Taiwan. So anti-war, pro-status quo, EU and Asian allies of United States. So basically, it is up to United States to decide the future of the world. World War III is possible if United States pushes South China Sea countries to go after China and pushes European Union to go after Russia. If United States decides to push these countries, they will go to war. For sure, with the help of United States, these countries will go to war against Russia and China. But if United States doesn't make that push, because remember, it's not popular in United States to go to war right now, at least right now. And definitely, like, all the bureaucrats and deep state, whatever it's called, in the Washington is definitely interested in going to war and the military industrial complex profits and all that. But American public doesn't want war. So politicians have to decide whether to side with American public or whether to side with bureaucracy of the Washington and military industrial complex. And that will decide what Asian countries in South China Sea will do against China and what European countries will do against Russia. But invasion is definitely going to happen. That war will come. And United States basically decides World War III or Cold War. World War III is possible, but it is unlikely after the fall of Hong Kong and Afghanistan. Oh God, why am I laughing? After, remember how China just took Hong Kong in 2019 and United States did nothing? What will they do in Taiwan? Remember how Afghanistan was taken over by Taliban, and Hong Kong happened during Trump administration and Afghanistan happened during Biden administration. And remember, Russia and China are nuclear states, and in I think NATO countries, I think Britain and France are also nuclear states, but Japan, South Korea, they are not nuclear states. So if World War III happens, nukes will go off. Maybe not. But I think most likely outcome is that China and Russia win and they get sanctioned and another East and West Cold War begins. This is the most likely outcome based on the countries that are involved. Most of them have nuclear weapons. And remembering what happened to Hong Kong and Afghanistan. And like I said, the European Union and South China Sea countries, they are anti-war, but they do not want to lose Ukraine and Taiwan. That's for sure. But they do not also want to go to war. It will be the United States who pushes them to go to war. So what will it be? World War III or Cold War? I think most likely outcome is Russia takes back Ukraine and China takes back Taiwan. and they get sanctioned, and East and West Cold War begins once again. What do you guys think will happen? Will there be a World War III? Will there be Cold War? I think there will be Cold War. Sorry to be bearer of bad news, I guess. If you are Ukrainian or Taiwan is watching this, if you are from former Soviet Union states watching this, I don't know what to say to you. My prayers are with you. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll just see you guys very soon.